You're live.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order and begin by acknowledging with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish. As peoples have been stewards of these lands and waters coming Neklelahwem, Bowen Island. And so welcome to the Bowen Island Municipality meeting for Monday, March 24th, 2025. And thank you for joining. I'm Andrew Leonard, the Mayor of Bowen Island Municipality and Chair of this meeting. And I'd like to begin, as I do, by introducing the other elected members of our council here today, including on my far left, Councillor John Saunders. To his right is Councillor Tim Wink. To his right is Councillor Alison Morse. To my far right is Councillor and Islands Trustee Sue Ellen Fast. To her left is Councillor and Island Trustee Judy Getty. We're also joined by members of our professional staff team here today, including our Chief Administrative Officer, Kieran Dillon, Corporate Officer, Sophie Singha, as well as other members of our staff who may be presenting reports here today. This meeting is being recorded, and when members of the public speak during the public comment and question and answer portion of... Oh, and Councillor Jurgensen is joining us online. Apologies, Councillor Jurgensen. This meeting is being recorded, and when members of the public speak during the public comment and question and answer portion of the meeting, the presence and voice will be included in the permanent recording, which will be available on our website at bowenislandmunicipality.ca or on our YouTube channel where it is streaming live now. This council meeting is an official forum for the conducting of the business of local government. We all love our community. We are all passionate about what happens here. I'd encourage everyone to maintain a constructive and respectful tone during the meeting and to direct comments for council during the public comment or question and answer portions of the meeting to myself. For folks that are following along online or in the room, the full council package for this afternoon's meeting is available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca. And before I look for adoption of the agenda, I think it's just should be present. This is going to be our last council meeting in this room. And at this location. So when we pick up again, we will be in the new community center and municipal hall, which I'm sure everybody is looking forward to. But for folks that aren't in the room here today, it's feeling a little less than calm as everybody prepares for the moving trucks that are coming up that day. So just wanted to present our thanks to this building and this land that the business of the municipality has been transacted upon for the last number of years, and we're looking forward to our new home. And with that, I will look forward to the corporate officer for the introduction of any late items here today.
There are no late items.
Okay. So can I have somebody move approval of the agenda for March 24th meeting, moved by Councillor Wake. Seconded by Councillor Saunders. Oh, we almost didn't have a meeting there. Sorry. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
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 And that carries unanimously. Next up is public comments. I'll look to our corporate officer for any public comments here today.
There are no public comments.
No public comments. And no delegations. Moving on to the consent agenda. Are there councillors who wish to remove items from the consent agenda? Councillor Morse.
4.4.
Okay. Councillor Getty.
12.2.
Any other items to remove from the consent agenda? Not seeing any. I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda, please. Moved by Councillor Saunders, seconded by Councillor Getty. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that carries unanimously. Moving on to items pulled from the consent agenda, we'll do those in numerical order. 4.4, ratification of resolutions from the Committee of the Whole meeting, March 17th, 2025. Over to you, Councillor Getty.
I was
Or sorry, Councillor Morse.
I pull 4.4 because I need to go against those recommendations,
Okay,
so I'm not going to move the motions.
that's okay. Councillor Fast.
I move that council approve the list of edits provided by council committees and staff to ISL Consulting and adopt the draft active transportation plan, ATP, as presented at its March 17th, 2025 committee of the whole meeting. And I move that council endorse the completion of the governance check-ins twice a year, once in spring and once in fall, as outlined in the semi-annual BIM Council Governance Check-ins Terms of Reference, also at that meeting.
Moved by Councillor Fast. Seconded by Councillor Wake. Any further discussion on these items? Councillor Morse.
With respect to the first resolution, I'm just concerned about the amount of money this plan is going to be costing us, and generally, is why I'm not that keen on it. And under the second one, I have absolutely no problem with the concept of check-ins. It's just I'm not liking the terms of reference.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Any further discussion on this item? Not seeing any. I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
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 And that carries unanimously.
No, it doesn't. You didn't answer opposed.
Sorry, all
All
opposed, raise your hand, say nay.
Nay.
So that carries with Councillor Morse in opposition. I apologize. I had an absolutely terrible sleep last night, so you'll have to bear with me. My edges are a little bit fuzzy today. Moving on to 12.2, Phil Carlington regarding new ferry schedule dated March 13th, 2025. Over to you, Councillor Denny.
I wanted to put this on the table, I suppose, primarily for clarification to the writer and other people in the community that are concerned about this. And it's my understanding, having been on the transportation or committee that has been disbanded, that this did not come, and I don't believe there were any workshops done by BC Ferries with the community. So this has come to Bowen as a fait accompli that we've had no input into. And I understand that there are considerable problems with respect to the commuting school kids going off the island and commuters coming home to Bowen in the late afternoon ferries. I haven't examined the new schedule in that amount of detail, but I take it from this letter and from other comments that have been made to me that there's some considerable gaps that while there's some obvious effort to expand the amount of time for each run so that there is adequate time for loading and unloading. There hasn't been any conversation with respect to understanding the traffic patterns that are important for locals. So I think without the ferry advisory committees and without our transportation committee, that this slides past a lot of discussion in the community. And I wanted to, I suppose, comfort people in the community that this hasn't been something that council has neglected or not dealt with. It hasn't come to us.
Thank you, Councillor Getty. Councillor Fast.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to assure the writer that his letter was the first I heard of it. And it's BC Ferries who took down the ferry advisory committees on all the islands. So the public consultation that people may be expecting Bowen Island Community or Council to be having, we weren't even consulted. So it was a surprise, hard to prepare for, on top of all the other issues with BC Ferries. Thank you.
Councillor Fast. Councillor Wake.
Notwithstanding the lack of notice and lack of consultation, I just like to say that, and I hope we do have that, but I think there's something that's missing in this letter, which is we have talked about it before, about expanding the time between sailings so we can keep the ferry on time more of the time, maybe even most of the time. And so the inconvenience, what we have to trade off here is the inconvenience on a whole bunch of runs where they're 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes late, and the disruption that causes versus not being able to accommodate as many people in a 3-hour window as before. And also, it was in that 2 or 3 hour window that a lot of the overloads took place and hence the delays. So I welcome, a good discussion about it. I'm not so sure it's a bad idea.
Thank you, Councilor Wake. Just from my seat, I was surprised that it was released just sort of all of a sudden, especially after all of the, because BC Ferries has been doing engagement on the island. So they were here last spring. They spoke with members of our council during UBCM. They've had strategic planning engagements, under their new charting the course initiative. There's been regular contact with the community relations and engagement folks, and I suppose I just feel odd that there was all of this engagement happening, but something that was operational that would affect the day-to-day schedules of Islanders' lives was not previewed to the island before in the past. With that said, I do agree with Councillor Wake's comments that, particularly in the summer months, my read on this is that BC Ferries has acknowledged that there's operational challenges and that the summer schedule during the day is a bit of an aspirational timetable from time to time. So I'm curious to see if this additional time between sailings resolves anything. There were BC Ferries staff on the island recently to meet with our CAO and our bylaw services supervisor. I attended that meeting as well with the Executive Director of Tourism Bowen Island, and Councillor Jurgensen attended as well. As from an accessibility standpoint, we were able to give those folks a tour of Snug Cove from the offloading of the ferry ramp all the way up to the school. And we made it very clear some of what our challenges were in doing that. They seem to be acknowledged. There was a communication again that there's a budget shortfall at BC Ferries. However, many of the points that we discussed at council previously and that were included in my letter that for reference in 12.5 of the agenda were made explicitly clear to BC Ferries. So I'm curious to see what they come back with and what the follow-up from staff will be. But my hope is that they will contribute their share to what is the BC Ferries issue in Snug Cove, and hopefully our residents don't get tasked with the entire bill of it. With that, perhaps I'll send it back to you, Councillor Getty, for a motion to receive.
All right, I move that the letter that's item number 12.2 from Phil Carlington be accepted as information to the council.
Moved and seconded by Councillor Fast. Any further discussion on this item? Not seeing any. All in favor, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that carries unanimously.
I'm just thinking here a little bit happily like you are. I think we need to maybe be on record that we write to BC Ferries that we are extremely disappointed that there was no community consultation before the schedule was changed so significantly. So I would move that the letter be sent under the mayor's signature to BC Ferries, advising of our disappointment that the May 15th, 2025 to March 31, 2026 schedule was significantly changed without any community consultation.
Just let the fingers of our corporate officer catch up to that. Get out as written. And we'll look for a second.
But council request a letter be sent to BC Ferries under the mayor's signature advising council's disappointment that the May 15th, 2025 to March 31st, 2026 schedule was significantly changed without any community consultation.
Moved by Councillor Morse, seconded by Councillor Getty. Any further discussion? Not seeing any, I will call a question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
And that carries unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Morse. Moving on to business arising from minutes, 6.1, consideration of an application for a development variance permit at 930 Waterfront Drive, Dorman Point. We have our Island Community Planner, Drew Backen, joining us here today.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So the purpose of this report is to provide results of public notice for Metro Vancouver's variance application to replace a beach access staircase at Dorman Point and to present the permit for council's consideration. So the application was first introduced to council at the February 24th, 2025 council meeting, where council directed staff to send notices to all properties along Robinson Road, as well as within 100 meters of the subject property, to advise of the council hearing today, March 24th. To date, no additional letters from the public were received since the previous hearing. Prior to the introductory hearing, there were three letters received from a total of 3 property owners. Two of them were from two of those letters came from two of those letter writers. They were from property owners outside of the notification radius. One letter was from one of the property owners within the radius. They expressed concerns on forage fish habitat impacts and the safe condition of the trail. Since the past hearing, I followed up with the property owner to provide the biology assessments that were also attached to this report. The variance request appears to be low impact and will reopen public access to an attractive natural location. And while environmental sensitivities in the area do exist, the park management framework used by MetroVen, as well as the biological assessment of Dorman Point, should be more than adequate to prevent any impacts from this simple structure. Staff recommends that council approves the DVP for Metro Vancouver.
I will look to council for any questions of the planner on this before looking to move the recommendation. Councillor Getty.
In the body of your report, you say that the one letter writer located within the notification radius expressed concerns around impacts of the construction activities on forage fish habitat nearby and requested that council approve DVP under the condition that a more extensive biology assessment be undertaken on those impacts. Was there any contact with Metro and their naturalists and any comments with respect to the concerns raised in that letter?
They didn't raise any further. They didn't provide any further updates. They briefly addressed the forage fish habitat in that report, and no further update on that.
And if I may follow up, was Ms. Goose, were you involved at all in that the concerns raised in that letter?
I did review the report and I think I suggested to Drew that maybe you should ask Metro Vancouver for a bit of an update on the forage fish, but he had said that actually Metro Vancouver staff had already reviewed that in their environmental report, and that he didn't think it was necessary to revisit it. So I don't know if you can provide that portion of the report maybe that was addressed.
Sure, trying to put that out.
All right, so are we reassured that there's not the harm that's been described in that letter, or that Metro is wanting the staircase regardless? Do we know?
Like with the report that was done, it's already, I feel it's above and beyond what they were required to do. And, as I think it's said at the last meeting, like it isn't quite the level of a biology assessment where we would require one, like for example, in a development permit area, it doesn't go to the full extent of doing construction mitigation recommendations, things to do during the construction process to mitigate the impacts. At the same time, I've never seen an extensive report like that for a structure as simple as this. So I'm just not, I don't really see what further, I don't really see a real effect that doing a further biological assessment would do. I think they've already gone above and beyond.
Okay, Councillor Getty, Councillor Fest.
Just that I'm looking at the 4.2, which is page it's attachment 4 is the ecological considerations for site planning, and it's page 54 of our agenda about the forage fish habitat, and it does acknowledge that there's likely important surf smelt spawning habitat there, and the overhead hanging vegetation, some stock spawn summer months, some winter, some all year round. And they acknowledge the sources there. And but I would point out that I have never seen any besides driving on them and really intensive beach uses. I don't think we found any forage fish eggs through the volunteer inventory measures that have been, the monitoring that people have been trying to do for several years. And I only have the odd observation from people when I've been on the beach that they saw some little fish once. As far as I can tell, all of our public beaches, no harm is coming to them, and nobody has raised alarm bells about that on even our most used public beaches. And we don't have anything in place except forage fish habitat monitoring. So I would invite our manager of planning to say if there's anything more. Sorry, park planning.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to comment. Here, I just had time to open up the map of the forage fish habitat mapping that was done quite a few years ago. But there's no forage fish habitat identified around this park.
Thank you. Councilor Wake.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Backen. This is a very thorough report. I certainly like the look of the news there compared to the news there. And in a while to figure out exactly where it was, but on page 27, it's clearly shown in the upper left-hand corner. So I think all the issues have been looked into, and it would be good to have access to the beach.
That's fast.
I'm prepared to make the motion.
Absolutely.
I move that council issue development variance permit DVP 2025-0007 for the variance of the minimum setback from the natural boundary of the sea for Dorman Point, 930 WF, legally described as the numbers in the recommendation. Thank you, as written.
Moved by Councilor Fast, seconded by Councilor Saunders. Any further discussion on this? Before I call the vote, I'm just looking forward to this property at Dorman under the management of Metro Parks being open and ready for the public. I think it's a beautiful extension to Crippen. For all of the challenges we've had with Metro Vancouver in regards to Cape Roger Curtis, coming back to Crippen Park, I think the management of Crippen Park and the development of Crippen Park and the way that we've worked with Crippen Park over the years has been outstanding, and I really look forward to being able to visit Dorman Point under their leadership. With that, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, raise your hand, say nay.
Okay.
And that carries with Councillor Getty in opposition. Thank you, Mr. Backen. No bylaws. Moving on to staff reports 8.1, the 2025-2029 financial budget draft, final budget draft, request for direction. We have our Chief Financial Officer, Kristen Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. Through the mayor to the rest of the council. I bring forward today the third and hopefully final draft 5-year financial plan for consideration. Staff seek today direction on what should be included in the draft bylaw that is hopefully coming forward to council on April 14th. I have prepared a little presentation for you today to summarize some of the changes that are in this third and final draft. Before I get into the presentation, I just want to take a moment. I did summarize all of the public feedback that was received throughout the consultation process. At a very high level, much of the feedback received from the public include concerns about the overall economic conditions that we find ourselves in. We just do see a very different potential economic scenario from when the first draft budget came forward in December. As well, there was a general sentiment that council stick to funding the must-dos and not the nice-to-haves. We took this feedback and incorporated some of those changes into this third draft. And specifically around the FTE requests, myself, the CAO and the HR coordinator sat down. We did quite a comprehensive review of the requests for the FTE. We've included a rationale for what the revised recommendation is. It's in the staff report there, but the FTE request started out at 4.9 additional FTEs for 2025. And we're coming back now with a revision of those changes down to 3.7. So I'll just take a moment to share my screen with you and I'll talk about what's in the new final third draft of the budget. There you go. Okay. The underlying assumption has not changed. We are still looking at cost of living allowances budgeted for 3.5% for union staff, 0.6% for exempt staff. We haven't changed our inflation estimate from 3% in all of the years to 2 to 5. The property tax increase year over year from 2025 to 2024 is coming now at just over 8.8 million, and that's a 7.7% actual increase over 2025. There is still, at this point, we do believe an additional approximate 106,000 of new revenue that will be effective based on the non-market change impact on our property tax roll this year. So that's the additional revenue that we would get. Nothing else changed from the impact of new construction, new developments, that type of thing, changes in classifications of properties. This 106,000 of new revenue generated effectively lowers our proposed property tax increase by about 1.5%. So our effective change in the tax rate, actual dollars, this is in the actual dollars that we require, are about 7.7% more over, I'm sorry, that should say 2024. And the impact to the average property owner of that change will make it feel like 6.2%. The average residential property on Bowen Island is about just almost $1.6 million. So that translates into a municipal property tax bill of $3,768 for 2025. And that's a $221 increase from 2024, which was $3,547. And that's where we get the effective increase to the average property owner of about 6.2%. Looking at the distribution among the different classes of taxpayers for the who's paying the property taxes, 96.4% of property taxes will be paid for by the residential property owners. 1% will be paid for by those utility properties. And this expects that business properties will be paying 2.1% of the overall property taxes on Bowen Island in 2025. So there are a couple things that obviously we need to point at when we're saying what's driving the need for that property tax increase. And first of all is the changes to the FTE. So we are seeking to implement a 1.0 full-time asset management position. We have potentially considered that it may need to be a higher level position, and the costs of hiring at a higher level position have been implemented in this third draft of the budget. We are recommending that the complement for the fire chief position be increased by 0.2 FTE. They were seeking a 0.6 increase to their staffing. We do recommend that the 0.4 FTE increase for the emergency planning coordinator position is very necessary and be approved by council. We do recommend that council approve the 0.5 increase for the booking coordinator position in respect of the community center and looking after all of the new rentals. We are recommending that Parks position be increased by 1.0. We had been asking for 2. We've since considered the additional workload that was driving that request for 2, and we've reduced that request down to 1. And this does anticipate that we would be retaining those part-time summer staffed parks positions. And lastly, we do very strongly support the 1.0 request for the utility operator position. So that does bring the total change in FTEs from prior year to a net increase of 3.7. The property tax increase included in this 5-year financial draft plan. The total impact for 2025 of those increases, those FTE requests, is expected to add about 171,000 to the 2025 financial plan. That's about 2.07% of the property tax increase. And then there are other staffing costs that are not FTE related, but they also do add another 1.7% increase to the 2025 budget of about 146,000. And those are things like the annual cost of living allowance and staff as they progress through their salary grids. We're looking at about $121,000 of additional costs related to that. So overall, the 2025 budget impact for the staffing changes comes to about 3.84% of it. The other significant cost driver is the year-over-year property tax funded contributions to our reserve funds. So total incremental property tax funded contributions to reserves this year is $475,000. Most of these are going to capital reserves. Of course, the roads and infrastructure reserve, capital renewal and replacement reserve, equipment reserve, fire equipment protection reserve, and the recreation reserve are all typically used to fund our capital program each year. So the total incremental property tax funded contributions to reserve, so this is the increase from what we contributed in 2024, is 475,000, and that's a 5.76% increase from last year. Total general fund capital expenditures anticipated in 2025 are just over 6.2 million. We're still in this kind of intensive period of capital expenditure. We need to get through the community center work for the next 3 or 4 years on dealing with the worst of the culverts and the roads capital plan. 6.2 this year. And as we start to get through some of the most intensive capital works, we anticipate that we could begin to taper off, and hopefully with an investment of $2,500,000 going forward will be an amount that is sustainable for us from a financial perspective, and one that will really address the capital infrastructure work that has been left year after year for many years. Looking at where we're at with our debt service limit, there is a provincially prescribed debt service limit that states that we mustn't go above 75% of our own source revenues. So, sorry, 25%. 25% of our earned revenues equals $3.4 million. And our annual debt service cost is about 1.4 million. That's among all of the funds, general funds, water funds, sewer funds, all of them. So that puts us at about 40%, 41% of our current prescribed debt service limit. In the utilities, we are recommending increases to the utility rates, 5% across the board for the west side systems, the 4 west side systems, Coastal Bay, Bowen Bay, King Edward Bay, and Blue Water Park. We're recommending 4% increase for Good Point Water. We're recommending a scale increase for Cove Bay Water ranging anywhere from 19 to 26% for the water. 4% increase for Eagle Cliff to the flat rate, and then anywhere from 2 to 8% for the variable rates in Eagle Cliff. And lastly, for Snug Cove Sewer, we're looking at a 5% rate increase year over year. We are recommending a new parcel tax be imposed within the King Edward Bay local service area. We're recommending $200 annually for connected properties and $120 annually for the unconnected properties. And lastly, we have a recommended increase to our garbage parcel tax, $3 a year from $6.35 to $6.38. We have put in the budget report that's included within the agenda today. There is on page 76 of the agenda. There are several options for council to consider within the 5-year financial plan. Things to support inclusion or things to consider removing in order to try to adjust that annual property tax rate increase further. And the actual cost of each of those initiatives or projects and the percentage impact that would be the impact to the 25% tax rate is set out in that report on page 76. Just overview of where we've been and where we're at with the property, with the 5-year financial plan development process this year. We started back in January with a committee of the whole on the 20th. And we've worked our way through with budget open houses, with a dedicated utility committee of the whole meeting. And we find ourselves here today, March 24th, with third and final draft being presented to council. We do, our hope is that we will have sufficient information to come back to council on the 14th of April with a draft 5-year financial plan bylaw for consideration for adoption. We do have to have our 5-year financial plan adopted before May 14th in every year. I think that's it. So questions, comments?
Okay, looking to council for questions, starting with Councillor Fast, Councillor Saunders, Councillor Wake, Councillor Morris. Oh, and Councillor Getty.
Thank you. My question relates to one of your earlier slides where you said business properties pay 2-point-something% of all the property taxes. Was it 2.1?
2.1, yeah.
2.1. Okay, that's right. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay, Councillor Saunders.
Thank you through the chair. I guess my only real concern that I'm looking at here is with the FTEs. And notwithstanding the efforts that I know everybody on staff makes, because I've been over the last 2.5 years watching the professionalism, the effort that goes in. It's been really eye-opening for me, but I'm looking at some of those FTEs, like the asset management one, for a full FTE. I totally get that. It's unfortunate we need it, but we absolutely need it. And then the fire and the emergency planning, I don't take any issue with at all. But a couple of them, like booking coordinator in the parks and road, which is essentially 1.5 between the two of them. Like the half thing for rec booking is that equates to 20 hours a week, roughly. Unless you're doing 37-hour weeks, I don't know. But in any event, it's 15 to 20 hours a week, and the parks crew position would be 40 hours or 35 to 40 hours. These just feel to me like they'd be valuable for sure. But in light of the comments that we've received back, feedback on this, and in light of my own way of looking at this, is I'm inclined to think that we need to unfortunately look more at efficiency than finding ways to do things more efficiently, which typically means work sharing and more work for people that are already here. It's just that those two things in particular don't feel critical. They feel nice to have. These would be really great if we had them, and it would enhance the community, it would enhance the operations of both these sectors, but they don't feel like must-haves to me at this point. And, you know, we are in maybe it's overstating to say a precarious financial situation, but it's certainly on a knife's edge. I think we would probably mostly agree with that. And I think we have to chip away wherever we can. And it may seem like small potatoes, they will have a position kind of thing, but that's chipping away. I think we need to continue to focus on things that are as your feedback received, things that are must-haves as opposed to would really like to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Councillor Wake.
Thank you for a very detailed report, as always. And I appreciate the effort that was made to respond to public comments, our comments, to try to pare this down a little bit. One area that I think maybe we should be looking at is the council chambers AV upgrades, which is $70,000 or 0.9%, comes out of property tax. Is that something that we need for sure, or should we wait and see how things go in there?
One thing I will add is there is a possibility to look at grant funding to get some of this for up to $25,000. So it may, when the final decision is made, it may not be, we're always planning for worst case scenario, but it may be able to come in a little bit less. So do you have anything to add for
Yeah, so we are moving the current AV equipment to the council chambers community conference room at the community center. So we will be able to function with this equipment as far as I know. So the AV would be that would be an enhancement or an upgrade for accessibility purposes. I believe the granting opportunity doesn't have a hard and fast deadline. The accessibility grant.
And the problem we've been having here with the sound, for example, has that been resolved?
I am told so, but by our IT provider.
Well, I just thought that might be an opportunity to rather than when you got free, give it a run.
Thank you, Councillor Wake. Councillor Morse.
Kind of done through. So the first comment was the increase in the parcel tax for the garbage collection. Is there something in their contract that's gonna causes that need for the increase, because they were under budget? Just looking at the 2024 actual versus budget, and they have considerably cut down on what they're collecting. So why do we need to increase the parcel tax?
So they were under budget because we over collected last year deliberately in order to fund the purchase of the new garbage cans that you see in Cove Bay. They just don't fall out in the operations budget because they're capital purchases. The transfer goes into capital, and that's the money that was used to fund those purchases.
So because their operations line shows what we paid them shows.
Yeah, but the parcel tax also funds solid waste operations. So other things that we purchased in 2024 include 2 new large containers that go on the backs of the trucks where they take the stuff in. That equipment is owned by BIM. We had to replace 2 of them last year at a cost of $24,000. That was not anticipated in the budget. What was anticipated in the budget was the purchase of the new garbage cans in the Cove. So we did over collect last year, keeping the parcel tax at the same this year in order to make sure that we have that funding for the significant solid waste bins that we bought. And then we do increase it a bit each year in order to fund increases to the tipping fees charged by Metro Vancouver, because we do outside of the contract is the cost of the tipping fees. We pay those directly ourselves to Metro Vancouver.
Okay, wait, fund accounting. And so. Just going back and looking. So with respect to the worker, the parks worker. I'm not quite understanding why it was a request for additional staffing. Because we did have summer students in the Parks Department last year, didn't we?
Yeah,
So, and your comment here says the revised recommendation includes continuing the part-time summer student positions.
Yes.
Which I think is great because most of the work on the trails and the parks needs to be done in the summertime, not necessarily the wintertime. So is it really an additional, those 2 summer students, is that really additional?
I know we're maintaining that, and the request is for a full-time 1.0 operator position.
And that's, so that is still an addition, that's in addition to the summer students.
Well, the summer students wouldn't be a change. They have been in the budget ever since we can recall.
Yeah.
So we're asking to maintain that from last year, and we're asking for a further 1.0 addition, which would be a full-time operator.
And is, I guess, the justification for that?
Additional workload resulting from the taking on trails, parkland. Over the years, we've never increased that staffing complement.
The more we get, the more it costs us to maintain. Simple as that, okay. And the budget, which this I don't think is in the necessary report. The budget for doing the parks management plan for the Grafton Lake lands. Do we really need to do that?
I'll let the environment manager speak to that.
I mean, is it, I was thinking it was gonna be as simple as what trails do people get to walk on and what trails don't they? And then you don't need that much money to do that, so why are we spending so much?
Yeah, through the chair, we did look at, both options that we could do it just as a park management plan or more of a holistic watershed management plan. And, but, you know, in discussions with staff, like with the director of engineering, and then with the ECAC and the Parks and Trails Committee, we had a bit of a workshop, and I think the consensus was that, so, watershed management plan would be the desired approach to that initiative.
And part of that is being paid for by the Cove Bay people.
25%.
Okay, and then the salt brining machine. Is that gonna save us money or just, I guess in a lot of these things where you said improve service delivery and reduces funded through a current year contribution to equipment reserve, foregoing the contribution to reserve to pay for the equipment would reduce the property tax increase. So I'm just having a little trouble understanding that comment.
Well, effectively, if you put $100,000 into a reserve, but you spend $100,000 buying new equipment, you're no better off. You're in the same position. So if you forego the equipment and you forego the contribution to pay for the equipment, then you don't need to raise property
Oh,
tax.
so that's what you're meaning by that. So it's either, I mean, because I think we should be making the contribution to the reserves and then using them for buying the equipment, and some years it'll come out to be the wash, other years we'll have money that'll stay in the reserve because the new piece of equipment isn't as big.
Yeah.
So this was okay, don't make a contribution to reserve and don't buy the equipment.
Correct.
And then
And you're still
Then you're saving,
$50,000
okay,
into your reserve.
I was not understanding what your comments there. And then looking at the comment about the fire department and funding it from surplus. And normally I don't like funding things from surplus, but they had a huge surplus. Their operational budget was way under budget, actual to budget. So, and then when we first started out with, we would allow the fire department, if they spent less than they had been allocated for their operating budget, that went into a fire department equipment reserve.
Mhm.
So in a way, I would like to see that start to happen again. So you don't have the spend it or lose it mentality.
Well, the surplus, I guess you kind of gotta dig into it a little bit, because if you look at the fire department surplus and you consider that $150,000 in that budget was a grant funded $150,000 disaster mitigation program expenditure, which the revenue was never received, so we obviously didn't make the expenditure. So once you back that out of it, you really need to really dig in there and know what it comes from. I don't wonder, are they actually in a surplus position if we take that out?
Well, yeah, because I did compare I think it was roughly $280,000 difference between their budget for operations and their, what they actually spent. So can you just remind me, what goes into sale of service and what goes into development revenue?
No, I can do that. Development revenue obviously is anything planning related.
Okay, that was basically my question there. So anything to do with all the planning, permitting. So, that does, it's gone down in the budget, so, which makes a little bit of sense to me. So the sale of services budget has gone up. And is that just because you're figuring there'll be more service revenue from programs at the community center?
Yeah, we've included a new line item. We're trying to be realistic. We are estimating $60,000 of rental facility revenue from that location.
And under the capital expenditures and renewal line, trail maintenance has nothing in it from 2025 on, and I was wondering why.
I don't know where you're looking.
I'm on the page, I guess it's third page of your operating budget,
Of draft.
or the second page of the draft financial plan. And operating expenses, and then it's got capital expenditures, annual renewal. And there's absolutely nothing in 2025 to 2029 for trail maintenance.
I've just included it all under trail staircase replacement. I put the entire budget under there. We don't have a plan beyond year one, what's in there, so I've just put it all in there. 125 for trails, any kind of structures on trails, and then $25,000 for beach access. So for a total of 150, and the plan's yet to be developed.
Okay. And the contributions to the Land Opportunity Fund, just to be clear, are not contributions from tax revenue, they're transfers from
Okay,
Cove Bay Water, so it's nothing to do with our property tax revenues.
No.
And now you carried on the civic facilities reserve.
no, I started it. I started $50,000 a year for our new civic facility. We gotta start somewhere, so.
Is that a reserve for repairs and maintenance of the facility?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so that was why that's a
Yeah.
new one. And the Growing Communities Fund, how much did we get in the first place and when did we get it?
2.287, we got it in near the end of 2023 or the beginning of 2024.
Yeah, okay, and what have we used? What's the 1,650,000 being, that's this year's draw? I mean, that, the previous year's expenses have shown on our will show on the financial statements, right?
Yeah.
So what's the 1,650,000?
So 400 for our Blue Water as a temporary loan. 1.1 to finish the outstanding remaining expenditures for the community center. And shoot, I have to look through my material. I can get back to you before the end of the meeting. on
Yeah,
this.
okay, I was just wondering about that. And then just looking at the, I was trying to figure out on your debt servicing, I was trying to figure out, just what it was. That you had for what the total of, earned revenues was. And if I work the number backwards, it's 13,833,000. If that's what 345,823 is 25% off. but I couldn't come up with that number.
We are always working a year behind ourselves, so you can find the number on the ministry website under statistics.
Okay.
Number, so you just
So,
go
so
right out
it's,
there.
they've done a number and put it,
We report it in our LGTE reports every year on April 30th.
and if, it would be a little more meaningful to me because some of the debt is Cove Bay Water and it's not the, or the water system, sewer system, then it's not the general public.
Right.
General taxpayer debt. If the two, they don't separate it at the ministry between.
They don't care.
So, so we could be at 25% of earned revenues. And all be water and sewer debts,
Yep,
nothing to do with, okay.
yep, all of that
Yeah.
eats up our overall debt servicing capacity. So
Yeah.
that's, we have to very much be conscious of what the debts are in the utility local service areas, because they count towards it.
Okay. And then I'm just wanting to understand just a little bit more of this, $50,000 expenditure for pavement conditions. It only looks at the top of the road, that's my understanding.
Director of Engineering's here, he can tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah, that would be, using visual, photography equipment, that's mobile ad, that, yeah, assesses the surface condition.
So it goes and takes pictures and then what? Or what is it actually, what's the output? Is it just pictures?
Yeah, if I may, it's more than pictures. There's actually a laser, what they call a laser profilograph, that actually shoot down lasers. And so as you go, we'll translate that into what's called the pavement condition index. And so when you have log pavement condition indexes, depending on the number, it should set up a prioritization schedule for road reconstruction. So it should output a whole image of our, if we put into a GIS system, should have the whole road network for Bowen Island, and it should be color coded from red to yellow to green, right? Green being very good, red being poor, and where we need to focus our road renewal budgets on. So this should output a tool that we can use for future capital planning and to create and make our report cards on roads better.
And will this be done before we do the roads maintenance work this year? This screening, I mean, to help decide which roads to do it on, or?
This year, we really have to focus on comparing the roads in Blue Water to the impacts of the water main project. And that's gonna take the bulk of our road rehabilitation budget for this year.
So I guess I'm wondering if this is something that could be put off and done in January of 2026.
It'd be nice to be able to plan for 2026 in advance and subsequent years. One of the key objectives in our asset management planning is to develop long-range capital replacement plans for all of our assets, and roads are, of course, a priority asset. So having this information sooner than later will certainly facilitate that effort.
So all the plans for road rehabilitation that's gonna happen in 2025, now that we're 3 months into it, was all done and planned for back last fall?
Well, we had planned for rehabilitation of certain roads last fall. When we got into the Blue Water System Replacement Project, because those roads, a lot of them, most of them are chip seal. It wasn't the plan of having, a 1 meter wide trench cut out of the road and then resurfaced. Turned out not to be feasible due to the impact of having the equipment on those chip seal roads and then the extent of the damage that's occurred. So that's taken priority.
All right, and I guess my other general concern is the level of our unallocated or discretionary surplus. I think it's way too low for having good cash flow and ability to pay bills.
Councilor Morse, to answer your previous question regarding use of growing community center, growing community center. Growing
Communities Fund.
Yes. 1,650,000. So 1,100,000 to finish construction, 400,000 as provision for the Blue Water project. And 150,000 is a proposed expenditure for enhancements. They were detailed in the draft financial plan on page 91, and they've been included as an attachment to my report in this agenda. We've got to complete the community kitchen.
Okay, enhancements to the community center.
Correct, yeah.
So that 175 or whatever it is, isn't coming out of.
That's equipment
Yeah.
coming out of accumulated surplus. This is, so things to do with construction or building versus equipment.
Because I thought we had a report that said we were under your proposed.
These are all things that have been taken out through the value engineering project. So if we want to go ahead and finish them on our dime, this is the source of funding that we can potentially look at to fund them if these are the things that council would like to see completed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morse. Over to you, Councillor Getty.
All right. First of all, thank you very much in terms of senior staff getting together and working through all the FTEs. I would imagine that would be a difficult, but it has been a productive consultation, and I think that I certainly appreciate, and I'm sure council appreciates that higher level sort of objective, tear it apart and see what is absolutely necessary, and I appreciate that work. With respect to the what do we call them? Other options for consideration in terms of the page 76, and it's the mostly capital budget. When I look through that and look at what is property tax, there's 2 or 3 items that still are on here. And one is the UTV vehicle for the fire hall, and I understand that if we were to tamper with this, it might be a very unpopular position, but I still have concerns with the fire hall wanting an extra little utility vehicle for plowing the however many snowfalls we get in a year and not having to rely on public works. And I realize and appreciate that they, the reason why it would be unpopular is that they forego spending their reserves last year so they could save up for this, and with another 20,000 into reserves they can afford. And this is on their wish list, so, but I still think in terms of if we are trying to be very, very careful and reducing as much as possible the property taxes, that is one area that we should look at. The other one is the $50,000 for the new fleet vehicle for planning and engineering staff. And the way that was described in the, and this is to take $50,000 from property tax and put it into not a reserve, but funding for a vehicle that could be used to pick up consultants at the ferry terminal and go to various sites. And I'm not sure how we've been doing it for the 25 years that we've been a municipality, but it seems to me that we have been managing that. And whether people bring their own vehicles over, which I'm sure they do some of the times, or it just seems to be an extra $50,000 that it hasn't been explained to me sufficiently to justify. And I question that one. The next is the salt brining machine, and I understand the efficacy and that this is perhaps the latest way of putting more salt on the surface as opposed to the pellets. But I also think that this is something that could be, it's on a wish list. It's not something that we absolutely need. And this is, again, the number of snowfalls that we get. God forbid we have a bad winter, but this is a fairly expensive piece of equipment that could wait until we've got more surplus or more feeling that we can spend that kind of money. So I've called those items into question. and think that we should be foregoing them, taking them out of the budget. That would, as far as I can tell, that is 0.6 plus 0.2. So would that bring down the total, am I correct in the math in terms of bringing down the total tax increase to 5 something?
I will do the math and confirm that.
Okay. The other notice that we had this week was that there was some sort of a top up to a housing grant. And I'm wondering if that has been included as the part of the income. And I'm pretty sure it's all spent with respect to plans that would have been either from taxes or general reserves, and I'm wondering if that can be adjusted.
It will be new money that isn't reflected in this draft 3 yet. This announcement came in since agenda cutoff. So we did receive approval to receive an additional $160,000 for a project that was pitched to the government to undertake I&I, so inflow and infiltration work on Snug Cove Sewer, with the outcome hopefully to identify additional capacity, which could potentially support additional housing units at Snug Cove. So that is, the work is in there. We had anticipated doing that work with a pocket of that funding, which we'd already received. So the only thing that changes is the fact that we need to add a new revenue line item. We're getting new money and we don't have to dip into that existing pocket that we already have.
So it's not gonna be a reduction of any programs cost, okay. The last thing is that in your discussion about information that was received from the community, there was one comment that landed on the discussion board, and I'm wondering if that discussion board costs anything. Very hard to work through.
No, it's free. It's a free add-on piece to our existing website, so it doesn't cost anything. We've tried it to see what kinds of feedback would be generated on there. We did hear some feedback from people that it was kind of difficult to register for, and maybe that is what prevents people from, I think, a lot of the confirmation emails ended up in their junk email and things like that frustrated their attempts to register. So we gave it a shot. We'll
Thank
see.
you. I was just wondering if it was cost.
It's a good platform for us to at least put this stuff out there. But we will make sure that we always continue to elicit feedback through all the other avenues as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Getty, Torcio.
Yeah, I believe there were some questions around some of these things. So just on the new vehicle that was requested, the picking up consultants was not the driver for this particular request. It was one of the things we could do with it. The driver for the request was the increase in site visits that we anticipate we're going to have to make with our planning staff. So for example, our planner Drew went out to site for the Dorman Point site visit. And as we implement our Housing Accelerator Fund action plan, which is supposed to generate more housing, we anticipate a greater need for these site visits. That was one reason. The other reason was, as we develop our asset management plan, we anticipate doing more condition assessments. So that might take the form of us getting grant funding for an engineering student to go out in the summer and do culvert inspections. So we wanted to increase the ability for our staff to go out and do condition assessments. Those were the main primary drivers, because right now we're having to borrow a bylaw services vehicle to do those types of things, which isn't, given the reactive nature of what bylaw services does, it's not ideal to not have that vehicle available when we need it. So those were the primary drivers in the picking up consultants. If that was the only case, we likely wouldn't have come forward with this request. It's more on the staff side for BIM staff where we requested this need, and we currently don't have. We just have the one bylaw vehicle, I believe, and that's it, unless staff are aware of some other ones. So That's just some context on that one particular item. And with the salt brining, the idea there is that by applying the salt in a brine form, which is done in a lot of municipalities, it could reduce the amount of actual road, the granular or solid stuff, because what ends up happening is when vehicles drive down a road, some of the salt gets blown off and ends up in the ditches, right? So this is a expenditure in the short term to with a future savings in actual granular salt and a better application. So that, you know, if we have an operating procedure in place that says, you know, if the temperature is going to fall, we're expecting snowfall, our crews are out there brining all the roads, and you don't have that accumulation of road and ice, that black ice you see on roads. This will mitigate that. So that's why this was put forward, and it's in line with the practice you'll see if you've ever been in the Lower Mainland. You see those strips of you know, on a pavement, you know, those two wet lines, that's what that is, brine. So and that's why we put this one forward. We could certainly that one is something we could push off to a subsequent year. But that's why this one here.
Is there any ecological benefit to the brine?
Well, if you look at the fact that a fast vehicle driving down will blow off the granular salt to the ditches, then the brine should adhere better to the road, and there should be an ecological benefit in that. So
I'm gonna keep going with the speakers list since we're in a long one. So I see our HR coordinator with a hand up.
Oh,
I
hi.
do. He's on my list. I'm sorry, was this in response to?
Sorry, Mayor, this is in response to the questions about FTE. In particular, the 1.0 parks operator question. I just wanted to provide a little bit more context into the request for that position as well. So it's not only for parks. As was mentioned, parks work is primarily in the summer. This position would also be supporting essential roads work through the fall, winter, and spring. So originally there were 2 FTE requested. So this is a reduction of an entire 1.0 FTE to just be 1 person to try to be able to balance both needs in terms of roads and parks. And as well as the 0.5 FTE request for the rec center for the booking clerk position. This is needed in order to keep up with all the booking requests for the community center. So right now, this is the only position that's actually facilitating booking and working with larger groups that want to book, more expensive but needed events that would be held there, or other rooms that are needed, or theater space that's needed. So that's just sort of the context for that position as well.
Thank you. Moving on to Councillor Jurgensen, and then I've got some RSC, our Director of Engineering, with a hand up.
I just wanted to mention that in response to Councilor Saunders' question about the need for that additional parks roads commission, I do have some additional information to provide, which I can do now, or I can do I hope go through the speakers list.
Yeah, hold off now, as Councillor Saunders was a few speakers back, and I'd like to get to Councillor Jurgensen, and then I'll pick up the FTE discussion as well in my comments. Councillor Jurgensen.
You're now on mute. Thank you. My comments actually do pertain to Councillor Saunders's questions from earlier.
Oh, perfect.
And my questions are, understanding that sometimes you have to spend money to be able to keep things operationally efficient and keep more money coming in. What is the cost of not having those 2 positions that he referenced to the municipality? Like, if we do not have those positions and aren't able to get those tasks done as a result, what are the costs that we're looking at, just to put into perspective?
Well, there's
So, Mr. Graham, maybe I'll have you join us up here at the front, just so for the sake of the room.
I'll just share my screen. slides that relate to that question. So, in terms of the additional FTE request for parks and roads, I should point out that there has been a reduction in park staff in two ways. Back in 2023, due to when the former parks manager moved on, and there was some reshuffling, there was a net decrease in 0.3 FTE, which has remained since then. Also, there's, as mentioned, there's budget for 2 4-month positions during the summer months to supplement park operations. In reality, finding people fit the criteria for those 2 4-month positions has been difficult. Often we end up with only able to hire high school students, and they're only available for a 2-month period. A lot of their time gets taken up with training. So we end up with really substantially less than what's budgeted in terms of actual staff on the ground. There's also been substantial additional requirements added over the years. There's the 1.6 kilometers of multi-use path that's been added since 2021. There's been about 5 kilometers of new park trails that have been added since 2018. And now we're going to have landscape maintenance requirements for the community center, which will fall to park staff. So in general, there's been an increase in responsibility and a decrease in available staff to do that. So getting to Councillor Jurgensen's question, there's already a gap between the expected level of service and what can be delivered with the limited staff that we have. So with parks, because we have a common crew for roads and parks, and there's a need to prioritize tasks that relate to public safety, we end up prioritizing pothole repairs, dealing with hazard trees, brushing to maintain sight lines, dealing with critical drainage issues. And what ends up falling behind a lot is the parks maintenance tasks. And in fact, we probably aren't keeping up with what people expect in terms of how quickly potholes will be repaired, and how often or how quickly brushing will be done or drainage issues will be dealt with. So not having the additional staff will just essentially reinforce that gap. Another cost to consider is the significant savings that can be achieved by undertaking work in-house with our own staff rather than hiring contractors. So a concrete example of this is last year, there were 2 bridges which were replaced on golf course trails by BIM staff. We did have a contractor provide a quote on that work to install. We had procured bridges, aluminum bridges that were owner supplied. The cost to have the contractor install that would have been over $60,000. Staff did complete the project, and the overall material costs were less than $5,000. So that's a substantial savings to the municipality. An impact of doing that work internally was that was essentially falling behind on a lot of the operational tasks that are ongoing that I mentioned previously. Having an additional staff would certainly mitigate that impact and enable us to take on projects like this more frequently without falling behind, without falling so far behind on our operational requirements. Just this year, there was a staircase that was replaced to Kate's Bay Beach. That was a $20,000 cost. And that's an example of a project that our staff could have done if we had more capacity. And then just as a general comment, being able to spend more time on maintenance of our infrastructure and our facilities, our roads, our park staircases and structures, that sort of thing, can extend the life of those assets and reduce the amount that we have to spend on capital. So hopefully that addresses that question about what, the impact of having an additional staff versus not having an additional staff would be.
Thank you. Anything else from your end, Councillor Jurgensen?
Patrick Graham.
Yes, thank you, to the Director of Engineering. Through the chair, is it possible to also get a similar, look at the rec booking, coordinator position as well?
We just have, we're playing musical chairs with our Director of Engineering and Manager of Recreation right now. It's coming up to the front.
Thank you, through the chair. As the HR coordinator mentioned, this booking coordinator will be solely responsible for managing all aspects of those rentals. So all of the client communications, the logistics with the software, creating those permits and collecting the dues at the different stages when they're required, and all the financial reporting for that. As the CFO mentioned, there's a target of $60,000 in rental revenue for this year. So this is the individual who's responsible for generating that. There's also a very strong need for front desk coverage that is significantly different from what Recreation has been doing to date. So we're trying to find a way to have that front desk open for as many of those hours as possible. So currently, the Recreation office is open from 4:30. It's 8:30 to 4:30 Monday to Friday. We're moving into 7 days a week from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. hours at the facility. So one of the potential costs of not funding that is the level of service that we'll be able to provide at that front desk. Because existing staff now, if we were to manage the full operation with the core, the same existing staff as in the Recreation department, well, it's just, it's significantly more programming that's expected. The hours and the diversity of the programming is quite different. So even from the very beginning, the business case that was presented for the community center long before I was involved, it always had additional front desk coverage as one of the elements of that, knowing that it's just a much larger operation that we'll be responsible for, which is quite different than most of the other departments in the municipality. Like the move to a new facility is just a change of location. For us, it represents a big expansion of services. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Drake. Back to you, Councillor Jurgensen.
That's everything. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay. I have a number of questions and comments that I'll work through here. Just from a frame of understanding, first of all, sort of where we are in difference between our previous 5-year financial plans and now, as well as, both from what's shifted internally in those plans versus what we're looking at in terms of tax rate increases or even bringing down the tax rate. And then also looking at operational versus capital needs. So I'm curious, first of all, and to put it out there, I know that there's been some discussion at reducing the overall tax rate in this 5-year financial plan. And going back to the previous discussions we had on budgets, where in 2023 and 2024, we were looking at 9.5% increases across the board for a number of years, without adding full-time positions, or at least they weren't contemplated in from what I saw in those previous plans. What are the major drivers of differences between what's been moved around internally in the previous 5-year financial plans and where we are today?
I would say the changes stem from changes to contributions for reserves. So when you asked us, I'm guessing 2.5 years ago, where do you see us going in you know, the next 5 years, what do you see us requiring? Our needs were basic operations, basic annual inflationary adjustments to operations, new positions that we were aware of at the time. And then what would fill that gap was saying we need to throw the rest of that into reserves. So what the piece that moves around tends to be is how much do we know what we want to put into reserves. What we have done in this financial plan now is we've looked at our reserve contributions for a 10-year period. So we're kind of setting a longer term goal. This is what we want to make sure that we contribute to our reserves from now over the next 10 years. So that is a piece that's now fixed. It's not out there moving around anymore. And that annual additional contribution to reserves where we want to be at the end of each year is we've set that as a fixed target now. So I would say definitely that piece that's the only variable that we can really move around with when we know we have additional pressures from the operating side budget. The only piece that can fall or be reduced is what we end up contributing to reserves.
Okay. Okay. I think we had some councillors know we had the Mayor's Task Force on Infrastructure meeting last week, which felt like a bit of a challenging meeting. I think it was, and I sort of went away from it realizing I think part of the challenge that I'm having with this year's budget cycle might be that I know more now than I did previously. And the second is just in terms of tracking our 5-year financial plans. When we look at things like, FTE increases, which were originally slotted at, 4 or 5 full-time positions coming into this year's financial plan, is that I don't think we as council were aware of them from previous financial plans. Like there wasn't a presentation at strategic planning, there wasn't a presentation in previous budget discussions that would have seen the staff complement grow this much. So it feels like a significant variance to me is one issue. It feels as if from a planning process, we might need to be doing some more work in elucidating that from a long-term perspective and doing some integrated planning, because it feels a little bit like we're just dealing with the year in front of us, and the what we slated out in a 5-year plan is shifting significantly. The second, and I'll go into the position specifically and some of the budget lines specifically. The second piece that I'm struggling with a little bit, with respect to the parks position and maybe some of the other ones, is just because the parks position originally came in at a 2.0 increase, although I understand that we were reducing summer students in there as well. But it feels relatively new. So the question is what's changed so dramatically operationally in the last year or within the last 2 5-year financial plans that this council has done that really necessitates an urgency of that position or of those positions. And if there was an urgency to them, it hasn't felt like it's been flagged either in previous council meetings or strategic planning sessions or budget meetings, which is why we're coming into this budget discussion. And I have to wonder if some of the discussion around the FTEs and confusion around them and like the sticking points on them is if it was an urgent need or if there was like major changes in operational needs over the last year, they don't necessarily, to me at least, feel like they were highlighted in a way that I really understand as the mayor sort of what was going on and what would need to necessitate the addition of those positions. So I struggle in supporting the parks position at this point. And I have questions about the other positions just in terms of the numbers. So I'll just go through them here. So we have it listed as an asset management coordinator position right now for, I believe, 66,000 in the budget?
I have increased the annual cost based on the discussion about hiring perhaps a higher level position. So the initial one, I think, was 53,000, and
Okay.
given that it's a half year position, I've added a little bit more to that.
Okay, so that's prorated for the half year.
Yes, that's right,
But then we would incur a full year
in 2026.
in 2026, which would add an additional property tax.
Yeah, you can almost double all of the first year costs because they're kind of coming in halfway through the year.
Okay. And I do fully support that position, particularly at a management level. You know, some of the numbers that other councillors might not have seen that came up during the infrastructure task force meeting was related to the asset management report cards that we've seen previously. And I thought it, you know, important to highlight a couple of figures in there is, you know, in terms of assets that we've already done the work on that have been reported to have a high probability of failure and a high consequence of failure. So in terms of our culverts, for example, there's over $7 million of culverts that are in very poor condition. 3.7 million of that are in that high probability, high consequence of failure. In terms of roads, we have 11.5 million in poor roads that are in poor condition. 6.8 million of that is listed as high probability of failure and high consequence of failure. $10.5 million worth of water mains are in very poor condition. 6.8 million listed as high probability, high consequence of failure. And so that's the most critical and the most pressing needs, which total $17.3 million, which is a huge figure. And I think it speaks to the need for the addition of stronger asset management, planning and project management in the community, but also a need for integrated planning. So when I hear that, you know, we added to the MUP dating back to 2021, whatever distance was just presented to us, when we added a number of kilometers of trails back in 2016 or whenever it was that, you know, have operational considerations now, it feels to me as if the actual operational impact of those things wasn't taken into account at the time, and we're paying for it now. And I'm not sure, and I'm not clear, and I don't know if council is clear what that means going forward in the future. So when we talk about expected levels of service, you know, I'd also note that it doesn't seem like we've got any publicly accessible service standards or service levels for some of those assets. We're still looking at a Grafton Lake, either park management plan or watershed management plan. So there could be additional operational needs down the road. And the challenge here from a council level, so, you know, my belief at a council level is, you know, we're responsible for overall strategy and we're responsible for those long-term visions. And it feels as if I'm not fully clear on where the long-term integrated piece of this is 4 years down the road, 5 years down the road. So when we have major FTE increases or major projects that are coming to us that are unplanned or that require expenses, or we did 5 years ago and surprise, now there's like significant operational funding that need to be directed to those that haven't been planned for. I think that's a challenge for us long term. In terms of reducing the effective tax rate, when I look at that 17.3 million in just the asset management work that's already been done, that number of that high probability, high consequence of failure number isn't going to go down any. And if it's not planned for, or we need to borrow for it in the future, that's going to have impacts on the municipality in terms of debt servicing, as well as the overall ceiling that we have. So it's a number, and as the information comes in, it makes me more nervous because there's never been an infrastructure number that's come in this term that's felt like, oh, that's better than expected, right? That's lower than we thought it was going to be. So my sort of frame of mind right now is that, you know, what is it? It's similar to, you know, the village of Anmore went through this several years back where they needed to put in 10% tax increases over the span of like 5 years or 8 years or something like that, to catch up to this. And then at their council meeting, they would have discussions about every $100 that they spent. Like it became a real thing. And they, you know, they had a consultant come in and do a financial sustainability assessment, and they managed to get themselves into a good place. You know, my belief here is that these 9.5% increases that we had and that we committed to at the start of the term should be the bulk of them going towards our reserve funding, as well as going to places like our accumulated surplus, which Councillor Morris pointed out is low, given the sort of emergency needs that we seem to have each and every year, and given some uncertainty that we have with projects like Cove Bay. Our community center operating budget, I don't think is clear. So I wonder whether we should be lowering the tax rate or whether we should be lowering some of our expenses and putting that money into reserve and surplus. There's some questions on some of the positions. So I'm curious, with the emergency management coordinator, we know that our current coordinator has been doing a fantastic job with the resources that she has available. I think our emergency services planning and our work in it, and you know, when I've attended events with ESS or with the coordinator that she's put on, have been really fantastic. I'm curious, just in terms of the need for additional hours there. Because it talks about challenges with reporting and accountability to the province with the new emergency management legislation. What are other small communities doing right now to tackle that, given that they don't always have, I know many communities, even our size or like roughly our size, don't have emergency management coordinators, and I'm curious what they are doing to meet those provincial requirements.
I unfortunately don't have that information at hand, that I would have to make some inquiries.
Okay.
I can speak for a little bit. I mean, in some cases, the regional districts are taking on the role of the emergency response stuff. So, you know, for example, in Sechelt, Sunshine Coast Regional District does all the emergency management. They run the EOC center, and that community, Sechelt, didn't have really much involvement. They didn't have to do it to the degree that Bowen Island does.
Right.
And so for some they benefit from that.
Okay. And then with the booking coordinator, so the anticipated revenue for the bookings is at 60K, tied somewhat in value proposition to that booking coordinator. This position that's being funded with the Hearth, do they have a revenue component that they are driving as well, or is it separate to that?
Revenue that would be attributed to the Hearth themselves that they'd be keeping?
No, not attributed to the Hearth themselves, but in terms of generating for the community center. So I'd just like a little more clarity into that relationship between the booking coordinator and this position that's coming in under the Hearth.
I think, do you have anything that you want?
The piece that I don't know is, with 60,000, how that was generated, but I think that role with the Hearth, that production and programming coordinator has a very strong role in terms of beating the bushes in the arts section, in the arts segment, and learning like who are the touring companies, who are the production companies, and really letting the world know that we have this amazing new facility to be used. So it's hard to anticipate throughout the first year how that revenue will come in, because things take time. A lot of the arts productions, there's the lead time is significant in that. So it's quite possible a lot of the benefits of that position's work will be seen next year, and like towards the end of the year and in the next season, because they tend to set their season of performances. So I would think that there's still time to get some of the fall season of production in the space, but some of it may trickle into upcoming years.
Okay.
The other piece around that too, though, is the reasoning behind having that position report directly to the hearth makes that position eligible for seeking grant funding. So the piece around the grant funding is not something that we've really fleshed out yet. But we are recommending that that position report to the joint committee, so that some of the work of that position is directly reporting to a much wider group, bigger than the hearth. So we'll hopefully be putting some of those performance measures or goals or ways to measure progress, because we are committing to coming back and reporting back to council on the how that position's going.
But so in describing this reporting back to the joint management committee, but that feels new to me. So what does that look like? Like a formal reporting relationship, or they just?
Yeah, I envision where a monthly report, something like that, is provided by that position to however often that committee is going to be meeting going forward. But certainly some kind of mechanism to update the committee on progress with grant application writing, productions that have been confirmed at the new facility. Somebody from wider than the hearth needs to be involved in monitoring that work.
Okay, so just to be clear, then the hearth position is more of a marketing position, or is it a business development position, or the kind of the second through the first of the business development through the marketing and bringing?
It's all of it. It's that, and it's also managing those productions, helping with all of the production details that are associated with putting on a performance in that way. So that responsibility, working with a presenter, what really are their requirements in terms of tech and backstage and all the types of things that they may request for production, that responsibility becomes that hearth role.
Okay. And so and then this booking coordinator, so the booking coordinator is working with a module that already exists through, or is an extension of our existing registry of active networks.
Yeah.
Right, okay. And part of the rationale is to have this person be able to staff the front desk as well?
That's part of it, yes.
Okay. Are there, so just in terms of, and so that cannot be done right now with the existing staff configuration?
Well, we're working out as best as we can how to shift the schedules, who can come in earlier, who can come in later, who can come in on the weekends. Most recent hire in the recreation office staff was with the condition to be working on the weekends. So that will shift to the weekends, but it is the only rec staff available for weekends. So in the case of illness or vacation or anything like that, it leaves a big gap that, well, some of us will have to fill, probably for others would, but so, and the realistic part of it is that, so we do have an existing staff who is excelling in that work with the software and doing that booking. So essentially backfilling that a little bit more. So if that position were not available, that existing staff member who supports that does the vast majority of recreation communications. So all the newsletters, the Facebook work, all the flyers, all that sort of thing, that would be pulled back to some extent as well. We wouldn't have the capacity to do that. And we're quite reliant on a lot of that to get people participating in programs. So there may be a financial implication if we withdraw some of that level too.
So just in terms of the budget, the other budget numbers themselves, the only part that I'd probably highlight is the new youth center. I'd be concerned about, I understand that we're going after grant funding, but it's going to be a facility that is offsite, that's not part of our community center, and is going to be a net new when we're going to be in this first year of operating the community center. You know, I also wonder about that program generally. You know, I am a parent to a teenager. I am friends of many parents who have teenagers, and I would, you know, I think the programming for that age group, you know, in terms of a youth center and a teen center might need to be rethought in order for to be more successful, and to have a net new facility, you know, a net new facility that's satellite and offsite and startup costs and all of that, and that's reliant on grant funding. I question whether that's needed right now or whether that can be deferred in the future. And, you know, my personal preference would be to see that 0.5 position absorbed in the existing staffing envelope of the recreation department. And look at things like, you know, if people are working from home, you know, bring them into the center, shift hours, and let's get the center operational and see what needs are there first, and then add to the staffing complement before we begin contemplating FTEs for that. So that would be my comments, and that's the end of my comments. You know, I know I've taken up you know, a lot of time. Just in sum, my concerns are really about this upcoming financial plan meeting the 5-year financial plans that we've set out previously. That feels like a strong point for me, given that sometimes it's, you know, they tend to be, I'm not sure. I just like to ensure that we're, you know, the things that we've said that we're going to do back in 2023 and 2024 are still being met. The second is I would be very opposed to lowering tax increases just to get a percentage down, given the very high numbers of infrastructure costs that we're going to be dealing with and our inability to take care of it from a budget standpoint, but as well as from a borrowing standpoint. I currently don't support the hiring of a new parks worker. I don't feel that the operational need from last year versus this year has really strongly been justified. And given that if we're adding things and we just add them and we need to have them operationally, you know, we also haven't had the discussion of, okay, well, are we going to reduce services to keep costs down and to keep those operational costs down? It feels like some significant creep. And the other positions I can't support. The asset management coordinator, okay. The emergency management coordinator, okay. Fire department, okay. And the booking coordinator, I feel should be in the existing staff envelope. And last, some better integrated planning between our long-range public works plans, our asset management plan, and how we're financial planning. So that's a lot, but that's where I am. Councillor Morse.
As the discussion was going around earlier, and I believe the director of engineering provided a comment that said, in order to address the expected level of service. I think we have to, I don't know that we've actually got and sat down and looked at what is the level of service that is appropriate for, you know, roads, should they be pavement, chip seal, those kinds of things, should they be, we've got subdivision and servicing guidelines, which sort of set out the widths and whatever, but and what level of service for the maintaining for the trails, do they just get, you know, and also considering liability risks for proper signage if they're not maintained. So I think we need to have a discussion around what is the level of service that we're wanting to provide. And that will help with what you're needing. You know, should your road be expected to be snowplowed within 12 hours of a snowstorm or 24 hours? And I know we've got some level of service guidelines, but we haven't had those discussions. And I'm looking back at our budget policies, there's, before you consider adding new services or expanding services, creative ways to keep those costs down, or what other services might you scratch instead? And I'm just looking at some of the comments, focusing on, I'm definitely not keen on a new fleet vehicle for planning and engineering staff. I don't know how, I'm a much better case to justify why we need it. The only, do they really have to run immediately that they get the phone call by law enforcement issue? And then the UTV vehicle for the fire hall, I can understand partly for accessing trails and, people go missing on Mount Gardner and they've got to get a person down. Then you can't carry them down. ATV.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Fast, followed by Councillor Wade.
Thank you. I had started off with one simple question. What, did I get that number right? 2.1. So I have a few comments, if you don't mind. I'd like an opportunity to contribute. So I'll keep it brief. I am happy with this budget, especially with the recent comb through to pull out the, to look at where can it be trimmed. And I'm pleased with it for a number of reasons. Having been here, I think this might be my 10th budget. I wanted to start out by saying salt brining machine, I see that it reduces future maintenance costs written down beside it, as well as the ecological costs that come with spreading salt across the whole road surface, not just in the 2 wet lines, and also into the ditches, using less salt. So that, to me, that I'm seeing ecological benefits as well in some of these topics, and we haven't spoken about those, but I think they're there. Including in the park staff, where the business of conducting maintenance before you have an emergency is also relevant, as with roads, and also, although not as core, but it does add up over time if you don't keep the trails brushed and basic maintenance happens, then you're dealing with a bigger problem later, which I think is what I'm hearing people don't want to be happening. They don't want those emergencies, which are sometimes expensive because then you have to bring in the contractors, which is off-island staff that costs more. So back 8-10 years ago, I remember under many previous, a very previous CAO talking about moving towards more BIM staff rather than contractors, because the contractors were actually costing us more than full-time staff or part-time staff because of all the contracting as well as the costs from people coming from off-island companies. Anyway, and then I want to mention the Grafton Lake Watershed Management Plan. This is an ongoing project from back in 2003, was the first report about protect the source that Bowen Council took on about protecting the Grafton Lake watershed, Cove Bay watershed source from pollutants and as well as quantity. And all of these things need to be looked at. So I'd be unhappy if that particular, let's just say, I'm happy to see it in here as an ecological, taking care of our green infrastructure, which we rely on. Seeing some shifting around, I'll try and move a little quicker. Maybe at some point we need a report from staff about this focus on FTEs. I understand it's easy for us to focus on staff numbers, but does it actually save us money? Has there been cost savings by shifting away from consultants and contractors towards in-house staff and the capacities that means for staff to fill in for each other and when we've got an emergency? Okay, I'm going to just go faster. I think it's great. We've got the community center coming online. This is a huge, big project. I think it would be good to get it off to a good start with the booking coordinator and all the things that are in this budget so that we can make that 60,000 of revenue and more into the future with a good start. And we are dealing with climate change. I think this is partly why we are having all this problem with culverts and things like this. We're adapting to it by spending more on replacing infrastructure before we thought we would need to, and by building the community center, which I think is going to make us more resilient than just a bedroom community from of Metro Vancouver. All of this, I think you'll see in the budget here, and I'm happy with it, and I'd be prepared to move the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Fast. Over to you, Councillor Wake. Councillor Getty.
Some specific comments and then some more general comments. So things like the UTV for the trails, and the salt grinding machine for that matter. These are matters of public safety. I just don't think we should be, delaying them when they involve. It's not only the impact on the vegetation beside the road, but it's also making the road be in better condition, as good a condition as we can get it in as fast as we can. On an island where frankly, a lot of people aren't used to driving in snowy, icy conditions. The watershed management plan, first of all, we've heard from our community that how come we don't have one? That is our water source. That's our plan that has come to us through the Grafton Lake project. And we absolutely need to have a plan to protect it and protect our water supply. And I think it's important to understand it's not just a plan for the lake, it's a plan for the watershed. And we're hearing more and more about the importance of watershed management. So that's a few examples. On a more general note, I think we need to recognize the staff that we have right now, and we've had for this term of council. And I think they've been exceptional, and the amount of work that goes into all these planning decisions. And then when I read this report, responding to what was obviously some concern about extra FTEs, and I see how the management team came together and really looked at, okay, do we really need this? Can we put this off a little bit? Is there another way we can do it? And they did manage to reduce everything. Then for us to come and say, well, no, I'm not sure we need that. I don't think we have we don't have the perspectives that they do. And I think we've really got to respect what they're advising us. So like Councillor Fast, I think this is good to go, and I think kudos to our staff for all of our work they've done on this.
Thank you, Councillor Wake.
So I'm going to move the motion.
Oh, apologies, Councillor Getty first.
So the numbers that you've given us from the task force on infrastructure are significant and are, if not alarming. And I'm looking at page 79 and 80 of this budget or this agenda, and looking at, we've got maybe 10% of those costs that are in our budget for the use of statutory reserves for roads and infrastructure, for instance, over the next 5 years is about 17 or 1.7 million. So, if what you're saying is that needs to be re-examined in light of the more recent numbers, and that's only going to, we're only going to have more information like that as we get into details of the asset management, and if we go ahead with this position that we've got in terms of helping us with that. So, you know, if that is something that we need to prepare for or be better prepared for in the future, I'm not sure that we can make those kinds of adjustments in this budget at this time. So we've got a deadline in terms of when this has to get passed and before the minister, and we've got reserves that are giving us, I think we put into the reserve and spend into reserve. So it's 1.7 million a year that we're putting into at least road. And then there's more for culverts. So while we need to be very concerned about those numbers in the future, I'm not sure that we can change this budget at this point in terms of looking at it. But that said, I'm not averse to the idea of leaving the percentage as is and figuring out how to reassign some of these numbers. I still have issues with respect to the new vehicle and what the CAO was describing in terms of the need. It's not just picking up at the consultants at the ferry, but it's also looking at all the different site visits. That's description of work that is possibly in the future. It's not something that we're necessarily going to have all sorted out in 2025. We also have one vehicle and it's got a label on it that says bylaw, but it's, you know, there's always, it has been shared reasonably well, I would think, and it's a matter of trying to figure out how we can stretch that as long as possible without spending that 50,000. And the salt brining I had written in my notes isn't less salt, and with a question mark beside it, and it's potentially, and I don't know that we've got those answers, so it may be more effective, it might be less
He
salt.
says it is.
Yeah, all right, thank you. But it's, in terms of the amount of days of the year that we use that equipment, we have something that manages. And it might be better and it might be more efficient and it might be, you know, have lots of benefits, but in terms of a cost benefit analysis, I'm not sure that we've figured that out. So it's spending $50,000 of cash that I don't know that we've examined it in enough detail. So I'm still opposed to those expenditures personally, and I'm not sure what we do going forward at this point.
I have a list of the expenditures that have been identified by council. I wonder if I might just go through them right now and enumerate them.
Sure.
So I have from the FTE side of things, council has indicated some reservations with regards to the 1.0 parks position. That has a 0.427% impact on the tax, increase. The 0.5 rec position has been indicated as something with reservations associated with it. That has a 0.267 impact on the tax rate. Council chambers AV equipment was indicated as a point of reservation that draws a 0.85% tax increase. The brining equipment comes with a 0.6% tax increase. The car for planning and engineering staff, vehicle for planning and engineering staff also brings with it a 0.6% tax increase. And the fire equipment UTV comes with it a 0.243 tax increase. The total of those points that have been raised as concerns come to 2.986% impact on the tax rate increase. Now, the question raised by the mayor was, do you leave it the same and take the funding from those initiatives and contribute that to reserves in order to assist with the infrastructure deficit in the future? So that
may be something that council wants to explore further.
So with respect to the items, the capital items, the UTV and the vehicle, fleet vehicle, et cetera. If that 40,000 was put into a reserve fund. I mean, I think we should put the reserve fund contributions into the reserve fund. And then if we're gonna buy the vehicle or whatever, then take it out of the reserve fund. So my druthers at this point would be to make all those reserve fund contributions. And if we, but leave the approval of the expenditure to purchase the vehicles and the brining equipment and so forth out of the budget. And if it turns out that a better case can be made for them, then the money's in the reserve fund and the budget can be amended. Because we haven't been putting enough money in the reserve fund. So that would be my way with that. I'm okay with the staff increase for the parks and trails and work, that one. And for the emergency coordinator, but I'm not so sure about the one for the community center, for the booking clerk. Whether that's something that could be done by the facilities manager to get started with, and then see whether it's, how much it's needed.
Morse, Councillor Fast.
Thank you. I have one suggestion about the vehicle for planning and staff, and that is that there's a two moto vehicles over there in Horseshoe Bay. And since at least two staff come over daily from Horseshoe Bay, you book this online, you can book it up to a year or further ahead, and you can do it all with a membership. I'm offering this as a suggestion because this is what the Northern Office of Islands Trust, or Gabriola Island does. Also, their moto vehicles are off island in Nanaimo, and you just go pick it up and you tap your little fob onto the windshield with a little red light, and it unlocks and you get in and you're booked and you can change your booking or whatever. Anyway, that's one suggestion. And I can provide more info, but I'd like to read the motion. I move that council direct the chief financial officer to bring forward the draft 2025-2029 5-year financial plan bylaw for consideration, which includes all proposed changes included in the final draft as presented at the meeting of March 24th, 2025.
Okay, moved by Councillor Fast. Seconded by Councillor Wake. Okay, I'll take discussions on this motion.
Can I speak to it?
Yes, Councillor Fast.
Just the idea of the deadline is it's a month and a half away to get it into the minister. I think we've got a ton of good work here from staff. We've got good discussion among council. I think we should move ahead with this budget that staff have prepared, and then we can always adjust it later. We can always amend the budget as we go along. But I honestly, with the way that downloadings are coming from the province in terms of emergency management, for example, with the way that we can't cost share on regional projects like water and sewer in Metro Vancouver because we're an island, and emergency management and those other things. And with the more extreme weather coming with climate change, it's coming. So I think we should just move ahead with this budget. If we can pare it down to put more money into reserves, that's great. But let's use the good work of staff that they've put into this already and move the budget forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fast. Councillor Saunders. Councillor Wake.
Can I move the alternate recommendation with a couple of, you can't do that?
Not yet. This one would need to fail.
Sorry.
This one would need to.
Oh, okay.
Amended.
A process type question from an accounting perspective. So for the vehicles, are you going to make the contribution to the reserve fund and then purchase the vehicle out of the reserve fund? Or is the bylaw going to show straight capital expenditure and property tax revenue to
You want
offset?
to make the contribution, I do that, so in case there's some savings from our expected expenditure, they stay in. the reserve.
And we can have a decision we can make not to buy it.
If I could just put a finer point on the vehicle, I mean, we budgeted for a new vehicle. Our intent was to try and find a used one if we could for cheaper cost, but you go for your worst case scenario. So the other thing is not having that expenditure approved now could put us in a situation where it will be out of reach because of tariffs coming out on April the 2nd. We anticipate the cost of a lot of vehicles are going to go up. So we might be forced to have to get a used vehicle. I've talked that some trucks, you know, even in the States have gone from $80,000 to $100,000 overnight, just on the pure speculation of tariffs. So that's a real risk that we run. The longer that the whole budget process is pushed out, the more it's going to impact us potentially.
Yes, Councilor Wick.
I'm still a little confused about the two different booking coordinators. Is the $60,000 of revenue, is that just for rooms in the new community center, but not including the theaters?
No, including theater.
Okay, so those two coordinators are gonna work together, booking everything.
Same goal, yeah.
My only other comment is just expanding on what I said earlier. I think we've been very clear with staff on what our concerns are. But I think for us to start weighing in on those individual little decisions, we're just not taking their advice. And we go ahead and approve this and something changes, we can always not spend, you know, move to not spend that money. But I think this has been pared down and I support the motion.
Thank you, Councilor Wick. I'll be voting against the motion for a couple of reasons. You know, the overarching piece is that I never like voting in favor of something when I feel like I'm backed into a corner, and it feels like the timing issue is part of it. However, you know, my sense is that these are conversations that need to happen as the financial picture of the municipality becomes more clear. You know, and it's not just our municipality, you know, other municipalities across the province and across Canada are dealing with it. So it's not, you know, unique to us, this infrastructure deficit piece. And, you know, if it takes us an extra hour to go through line by line some items that save costs and contribute to things, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. I do feel it's our duty. I also, you know, the second reason is I don't believe that our current plan contributes enough to surplus and reserves over the long run. And even though it addresses some operational needs, which I'm also not necessarily feeling the urgency for, or if they were urgent, I feel as if they would have been brought to council previously. And last is, given the discussion, it does feel like there's enough juice in the room to talk about some key items that maybe need to be discussed and voted on a line by line basis. So for those reasons, I'll be voting against this motion. I would be interested in the alternative motion with some framing against it, but it's not something, this budget as it stands and its divergence with our previous financial plans, as well as some of the surprises that seem to be contained in it, and the looming infrastructure crisis that we're facing. I just don't feel it addresses that. Councilor Saunders?
Without repeating the things that the mayor just said, I'm also going to vote against it simply because, as I noted when I spoke earlier, I think we need to trim everywhere we can. And while I agree that, yes, we can do it later, I think we do it now because my experience is we don't do things, or not we, but once something is allocated, that's it. And I'm extremely concerned about the infrastructure deficit. I have been for 2 years, and I think we have to do everything we can to address it. And if that means tightening our belts on a few things that we'd like to have, then we need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Saunders. Councilor Getty.
I'm gonna be voting against this recommendation as well, motion, and I'm not sure that we've got the time and the that we're ready to make decisions with respect to working through the following additional options that are mentioned in the alternative recommendation. There's lots of questions that have been raised, and I think that we can fine tune it, and I'm not discounting by any stretch the work that the staff have done and their diligence and their competence and their belief in all of their projects. So it's just trying to figure out the new information for me is this infrastructure money, and I think that our costs, and I think that that's something that we need to sort out in terms of whether we can afford to put more into reserves and whether that's the way to deal with it at this point. So I'm not sure that how to get into that in detail in terms of making those kinds of recommendations between now and the move and everything else in terms of having meetings. I think that there's lots of room for, I think there's a need for more discussion. I haven't settled at this point.
Okay. I do have an alternative motion I can put on the floor should this one be defeated. Councilor Morse.
I can't find the line off the top of my head with the community grant budget. Expenditure, is it gone up or is it staying the same as previous year?
It's, I think, $8,000 higher than prior year. Give me a second. Community grants, 2025, yeah, $8,000 higher than last year.
And that's including the 38,000.
It is, yeah.
So basically, there's a little bit less for general community grants.
A little bit less, and also there is an anticipation of including an additional 5,000 for the tourism center to deal with the cost of living and inflation and that kind of thing in their fee for service.
Okay, and one more question. If we don't pass this today and you don't come back at the next meeting with a plan that we would then give first reading to, how does that affect the timeline and having everything to the minister by, or
Yeah.
adopted by May 15th?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We do have another month and a half, so I don't want you to think that you're up against a wall to make a decision. You're not. One of the things I am concerned about, though, is the potential for a mail strike. The union and the employer are in negotiations. They've made, to my knowledge, no progress on contract negotiations. So I am very much pushing for an adoption by April 28th so that we can get those tax notices in the mail. You only require 3 days in between readings of your bylaw in order to get that adopted. So with the addition of special meetings in between, in the month of April, you could still achieve what you want to achieve. And I would suggest perhaps adding a special meeting in between the 14th and the 28th.
Thank you, Councilor Morse. Councilor Fast.
I seem to be missing this infrastructure details that other people are looking at. Did I miss an email?
Within an email, it was originally presented, the estimate report cards were originally presented at our last strategic planning meeting, and then they came up again at the infrastructure task force last week.
Okay, I heard you talk about the task force last week and I was confused about that. Okay,
They were just copy and pasted from the strategic planning
gotcha.
workshop.
Thank you. Good. I'm glad. I didn't want to miss something.
Okay, and I mean, there is time to discuss an alternative motion should this one be defeated, but I'm not seeing any additional hands. I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, raise your hand, say nay.
Nay.
What did Alex say?
He said nay. So the motion is defeated with Councillor Wake and Councillor Bast in favor. I will move an alternative motion that I've sent to the corporate officer. That council direct the chief financial officer to bring forward the draft 2025-2029 five-year financial plan bylaw for consideration, which includes all the proposed changes in the final draft as presented at the meeting of March 24th, 2025. Be it further resolved that these changes include deferring the following for consideration to strategic planning in preparation for the 2026 budget. 1.5 FTE in Parks and Recreation, Youth Center, fleet vehicle, salt grinding machine. Be it further resolved that the tax rate be held at levels consistent with previous five-year financial plans passed in the 2022 to 2026 term by increasing contributions to surplus and critical reserve funds.
Can we get
It's the last little bit. You said the tax increase be reduced to what it was in previous term?
Be held at levels consistent with previous financial plans adopted by this council effectively.
What was the last year's increase?
Does that suggest, Mayor, that you would like to see it increase back to 9.5?
So I'll motivate on the motion if there's a seconder to it. Seconded by Councillor Saunders. So I've structured this motion in this way because it allows it to be severed into three parts that we can discuss individually if needed. I did send you a copy of it by email. Oh, you got it up there. Oh, there it is. Okay. So the first, it speaks to, yes, council's made changes. Second, there's a list of pieces that can be deferred to 2026. I've just added things in there that were discussed around the table. So amendments to the second clause could be made to strike or add additional pieces. And the third is a commitment that maintain the tax increases from the previous 2 years of our financial plans, which are around 9.5%. So that the implication isn't that we're cutting these services to reduce the tax rate. The implication is that anything that we're removing from the budget is going to go into surplus and reserves to deal with emergent issues that we might run into this term or come up down the road. And the reason for that is we are continuing to do asset management planning. We're continuing to get a more fulsome picture of what's in the ground and the cost of what's needed to fix it. Down the road, you know, if this does hold for a few years, there may be contributions from reserves that we need to loan to local service areas to undertake work in our utility areas. And it also maintains, you know, the motions collectively maintain the increases to emergency management, fire, and asset management as well. We can look at these, we can sever them if needed, we can amend them, but I think this is, from a process standpoint, a clear way to start getting at some of this. Councilor Morris.
Before I move an addition to the list of what to leave out, did I hear our corporate officer say that the council chambers AV upgrades weren't needed, that this equipment would work nicely?
We expect that the equipment will work. So the AV upgrade would be an enhancement.
So I would like to add, move that we add council chambers AV upgrades to the list of things to be left out.
Okay, so an amendment, is there a seconder for that amendment? Moved by Councilor Wake.
Add the council chambers AV upgrades on the basis that this equipment will work.
Yeah.
Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Yes.
I can't help but notice that one of the counselors couldn't hear the motion that was said, so maybe there is a need for enhancements.
No,
Sorry.
that was me not paying attention.
Okay, anyway, I think we've got an accessibility advisory committee who's been working, and we have various problems that we've been having, including with some of the barriers to participation that some of us elected council members have. And I don't support the amendment of taking it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fast. Councillor Gideon?
Well, that area is certainly near and dear to my heart, my ears, but you know, if we're trying to think of, I know that once we get the accessibility plan in place, then we can apply for grants, and that there's considerable grants that are available. It's just a matter of, we have to have this piece of legislation sorted out first, and unfortunately, that's taken a very long time. And there's also people that we have friends of friends in the community that want to help in terms of trying to set something up as some sort of studies and you know, working on research and stuff so that we can get it. But if the motion is that the things that are on this list are things that we're going to reconsider and the money would be put into reserves prior to the reconsideration, then I can live with that, right? So I think the $70,000 that's allocated for upgrades or to the AV would be the most conservative estimate in terms of not getting any funding and not getting any outside contributions, so that, you know, we keep the money in terms of the worst case scenario if we have to pay for it ourselves, but it stays in reserves in terms of us being able to reallocate it to you know, sort of a culvert that closes the main road or something, right?
Thank you, Councillor Gideon. Councillor Jurgensen?
Again, speaking in opposition to that amendment, regarding the council AV equipment.
Looks like you're done talking.
Building on what Councillor Fast was saying, this has definitely come up time and time again at the Accessibility Committee. I would support an amendment that said that we could drop that particular enhancement, which I would relabel as a need in this case, since there's some community members who struggle to access council meetings because of it. I would support an amendment that said that if we were able to get accessibility funding, then that funding could be reallocated into a reserve, as was kind of the original intention of this amendment, but it does leave that critical piece in there that if we don't get the accessibility funding, we can still fund the work. And if we're successful, as is our hope, in getting some accessibility grant money to do that upgrade, then we can by all means put it in a reserve. So just my 2 cents.
Okay, so an amendment that would sound something like Council Chambers AV upgrade unless grant funding is secured?
Quite the opposite, I think. That I'd be okay with removing it from the expenditures if we receive accessibility grant funding to cover it.
Okay, I think we might be saying the same thing.
Unless,
My understanding is that the AV upgrades were only to deal with the speakers and the microphones and the visual, not anything to do with making it more accessible for blind or hearing impaired people.
I mean, the upgrades to the microphones are probably one of the biggest things, like, quite often within council chambers, when outside council chambers, it can be quite difficult to hear what's going on in council chambers over the existing mic setup.
Yes, I agree with that.
And that may also be the fact that we all need to speak up more clearly and directly into those rather than, you know. But my understanding is of what the resolution is that $70,000 will be contributed to reserves. And if we find the system doesn't work well in the new chambers, then we can amend the financial plan and spend that $70,000 if we can't get any accessibility grants.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was important.
That's what the motion, that's.
Yeah, so any savings aren't, so should all three clauses of this pass, any savings that were achieved through eliminating any of these budget pieces would be contributed through surplus and reserves. Reserves.
And that's slightly different. That's general reserves. It doesn't mean that we will try to find other sources, for instance, for the AV upgrade. So that's just, we collect the money as taxes, defer this, these particular budget items to more talk at just strategic planning, but it takes it out of the budget and puts it into reserve that could be used completely differently.
Yeah, so my suggestion would be, it's my belief that it's council's role to be as clear as possible to staff what it is we would like them to do. So if there's something specific around the AV, it should be spelled out.
Well, it's right there. So the word, use of the word defer, I can't see the top of this. There it is. Include deferring the following for consideration to strategic planning and preparation for 26 budget. So they're pulling it out. And that there's nothing. Next part of it, does that put it? The specific allocations into. So the $70,000, if we're not spending it on AV, where does it go?
It's in the reserve.
And it could be
Into
spent on,
one of the reserves.
yeah.
Highlighted critical reserves, and you know, I don't think it's any secret, my key consideration is always infrastructure, because it's the biggest dollar amount right now, and I think it's the biggest risk to community. The other piece is that when we come back to strategic planning for 2026 for our sort of last council year, my hope would be that you've got an asset management manager on board, and then that plan is more fleshed out and clear. That we've based on this discussion, it sounds like, you know, there's some work, I think, on integrated planning that might need to occur, but then also a better definition of what expected service levels are across all of the services that we're providing. And my hope would be that council, with that information in hand, is better placed to make a decision on some of these pieces. Yes, to the CM.
So if I could just reiterate what I'm hearing, so I make sure that I'm clear on what this resolution is getting to. So the resolution is directing that staff remove those enumerated items from the expenditure side of the budget, but maintain the funding into the reserve side of the budget so that the funding is there. And that consideration of the proposed expenditures be brought back to council at a later date, such as strategic planning, or for those ones potentially that were grant funded, when the outcome of the grant is known, and brought back to council for consideration and approval of the expenditure at that time. Now I have one more question. Oh, council was presented with draft 2 of the budget. And draft 2 of the budget, if you recall, proposed pulling out the $68,000 of council remuneration increase plus $17,000 of misting station expenditures. My question to council, does this resolution take us back to the draft 2, or does it take us back to draft 1? Was your intention as well to consider the funding for those 2 items and contribute that funding to reserve as well? Or did you want to use that to reduce the tax rate from 9.5 to 8.5?
Right, so that would be, so just in my reading of the motion, that would be something to deal with in the third clause. So when we go back to our 2024 and 2023 financial plans that we passed, what was the tax rate contemplated for 2025 in those plans?
9.5.
9.5. So it would go back to 9.5. My interpretation is that we're working on the final draft of the budget as presented today. So it is drafted. So those monies for the council remuneration and the misting stations would equally be put into reserve. So, you know, my
We're not draft 2, this is draft 3, I guess, so we'll be draft 4.
the draft that was presented today.
Yeah.
At the start of this business item as it came up the agenda, as it came up today. And the implication is that if we save 2 or 3%, that's $160,000 to $240,000 potentially of annual revenue that can be saved and applied somewhere else to our critical areas. Yes.
So just for clarity, strategic planning update occurred in December. So for simplicity, would it not be simpler to just say that we're deferring it to 2026? Because if we're considering this in December, the year's already passed. We're not gonna, if we're gonna see a salt brining machine, we're not gonna be able to purchase it for the season in which we see snow, because we're gonna be talking about it in December. So a suggestion is just to defer them all to 2026. Or maybe look at upping the date of strategic planning.
Right, so if I may respond to that, so I think part of the piece is that these are, some of these things, whether they're new programs, new services, or increases in FTEs, need to be more fully discussed in the long range with council. And one of the changes that we made this term to strategic planning is that we operate on a quarterly process, or like three times a year process. So there can be pieces that are, what this also opens up is that there can be pieces that are brought back to council at those quarterly or, you know, once every 3 years meetings as part of the strategic planning process that, you know, will foreground or create discussion ahead of that big strategic planning that happens in November or December. So it's not that, you know, we're just going to defer it and then it gets killed until 2026, as I think, you know, questions of operational expenditures, capital expenditures, increases in the overall FTE footprint of staff of new programs and services should be revisited on this regular cadence as it comes, you know, and we can decide in 2026 if we want to take any of these up. Okay, but we are on no. Yeah, so we're still on an amendment. So sorry, we're far off track here. There was an amendment to add council chambers EV upgrade. The unless grant funding is received was not formally moved or seconded.
I moved it.
Second.
Yeah, it was moved and seconded, but the amendment to the amendment, unless grant funding was secured, was not moved or seconded.
I don't think it's needed.
Audio now.
If I may, I so move.
Okay, so we have an amendment to the amendment.
Second.
Moved and seconded that it now reads, be it further resolved that these changes include deferring the following for consideration for strategic planning and preparation for the 2026 budget. Council chambers AV upgrade, with the amendment being unless grant funding is received. That is moved and seconded by AJ and TW.
Sue Ellen
No,
Fence.
AJ and SEF.
So an accounting question from a budget presentation, then you're gonna have to show AV 70,000 capital expenditure, grant income 70,000.
Given that in order to approve the expenditure, I would need to do a budget amendment, I would leave what I have because it's not confirmed, and I would do a budget amendment at one time, which would include the revenue item as well.
Is that motion to work?
Okay, not seeing, Councilor Jurgensen, you do have your hand up.
I do. I'm a little concerned with the wording that it got changed to here where it says unless grant funding is received. I was moving for the wording to be the council AV upgrade if funding was received rather than unless.
Okay, so changing unless to if.
Yes.
Move them down.
No. So
Yeah.
yeah, I believe unless works, Councillor Jurgensen, and just let me work through that. So with the word if, it means that it gets deferred if that grant funding is received. So if you get grant funding, then it's actually deferred. So with the word unless, it doesn't get deferred if there is grant funding that's received. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I was thinking, and perhaps I'm wrong on this, but my understanding of the situation is that $70,000 that is being spent on it is only being spent if grant funding can't be received. That's the only reason it's coming out of the tax. It's only coming out. Essentially, what I'm trying to get at is I'm trying to get it to the point where it's only coming out of what we're collecting in taxes if grant funding is not available. So if grant funding is available, I would assume it would come out of that grant funding rather than out of what we're collecting in taxes. And perhaps I'm wildly off the mark here, but that's at least what I was intending. But I'm willing to stand corrected if I'm wrong.
Okay, so let me work through this a little bit. So if there's no grant funding received, are you in favor of spending the money?
You're
Just the
not.
taxpayers. Is that a yes or a no?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry. Not sure if you can hear me at the moment, but that is intended to be a yes.
Okay, so you would like to spend the money no matter what?
You're not.
Yes, correct.
Just vote against the amendment.
Okay, so in that case, you would vote against the original amendment proposed by Councillor Morse.
You're not.
That is correct.
So maybe I'll look to withdraw the amendment to the amendment unless there's any objection to that.
I would like to withdraw it, Alex, if you agree, then we can vote against the amendment. And it won't be included to be deferred until next year.
Yep.
It'll stay in.
You're not.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, so no objections to withdraw. We'll do that by unanimous consent. So we're back to the amendment of deferring until 2026. Council Chambers. Great. Is there any further discussion on this motion? We'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
You're now unmuted.
Aye.
All opposed, raise your hand, say nay.
You're now
Nay.
unmuted.
I mean, nay, sorry.
I was wondering.
So that motion carries with Councillor Fast, Getty, and Jurgensen in opposition.
You're now unmuted.
So we're now back to the main motion as written. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Not seeing any.
Is it possible to make it a little bigger? Sophia, thank you. I know it's hard to get it all on there, but I just want to be. And are we severing it?
It's up to council.
Okay, can I move another amendment?
Yes.
And that is for the third clause. Can it be amended to provide clarity to staff by saying tax rate be held at 9.5% increase? Something that's clear to everybody, because level's consistent. So I'm, yeah. Is that?
I would second that and also just strike strike levels.
Okay.
And add a comma. So it reads, be it further resolved that the tax rate be held at a 9.5% increase consistent with previous five-year financial plan, the 2022 to 2026 term, comma, by increasing contributions to surplus and critical reserve funds.
And you're seconding that amendment?
I will second that amendment.
Thank you.
Any discussion? Not seeing any. All in favor, raise your hand. Say aye.
Audio now unmuted.
Aye.
And that amendment carries, and we are back to the main motion. Not seeing any further discussion, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Audio now unmuted.
Aye.
Aye.
And that carries unanimously. Just gonna go back to our agenda here. Well, thank you for that, Council. I think that was a robust discussion. We got to the core of what folks felt around the table, and it feels like these are the types of conversations that we need to have, given the economic and political climate that we're entering into. And I just wanted to say thank you for everyone's diligence and participation around the table. It's an easy one to get to. Moving on to correspondence, we don't have any new business. So usually you would see the Metro Vancouver and TransLink meetings here. There weren't any meetings in the last 2 weeks from those bodies, so it is blank. And I will look to our Islands trustees. Yes.
What's some news on the federal, the 6.5?
Oh, the permanent transit funding?
Yeah.
Yeah, so TransLink will get, that is news, actually. It wasn't discussed at the Mayor's Council meeting, but the feds have announced $150 million of yearly annual funding to TransLink to the capital fund. So it's not operational funding. And unfortunately, it still remains at half of what was expected. So they were expecting $300 million a year in capital funding, but $50 million was received. And thus TransLink's woes continue. I would anticipate that within next month, as the final details of the provincial budget get shaken out and some of the discussions over there continue to happen, that we may see announcements, further announcements on regional transit. And over to our Islands trustees.
We had our meetings in Nanaimo in March 11 to 13, and we elected a new chair, and we came away from that meeting thinking that we've gone over some sort of a hump, and it was a well-run civil. It was, I think, very sad that Peter Luckham had resigned, and but there were good reasons for that, and we had good candidates step forward. 4 people, I think, that wanted to stand for election, and we went through an election right at the very beginning fairly quickly, and Laura Patrick is the trustee from Salt Spring Island. She ran a very good meeting for the rest of the week, realizing that what she'd stepped into in terms of rallying and managing and that large group of people. I think some of the fallout from the complaints on the code of conduct has resulted in a very well-behaved, reasonable council meeting, and we got a lot more accomplished this meeting in terms of getting through the agenda and having good discussion. So whatever problems there were, there's been some change, and I think it will hold, and it's looking better. So I have a governance committee meeting coming up next week, and we're planning to do a committee of the whole preparation to present the 2022 governance review to the whole of council. And if that has never been done, and there's been a recent request, bit of a clamor to get that done so that we see whether or not we're all on the same page and the work that should be done on that. So really good coming out of the Vancouver Island. That's that new organization that we've joined, AVICC, and they've got some work that is coming up about governance and amendments to the Local Government Act. So that's going to be well attended, and we're paying attention to that work as well.
I'll just fill in some gaps by saying, trust council passed the budget. They actually added in, 2 more in-person trust council meetings. So there'll be 4 in-person, trust council meetings, next year. So the general tax increase for the other islands went up by 5.8%, and, BIMS went up 16.4%, which is, which I passed along to Kristen Watson, manager. And yeah, it was a low drama meeting. There was some, but we passed a strategic plan, and we designated some higher priorities and LTC procedures and things, other things passed, but looking forward to next year.
Thank you, Trustee Fast. Any questions for the trustees? Not seeing any. Okay. Thank you for the updates. And information items have been received. Question period. I will look to our corporate online or for a gallery for questions. Not seeing any.
Yeah.
That I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor Getty, seconded by Councilor Wake. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Not seeing any opposed. Right, take a 10-minute